Opinion. I'm willing to be impressed by AI products, but Anthropic's AI-built C compiler leaves me a bit cold. It's little more than a clever demo. It is not the moment when software engineering, as we know it, flips over and dies, not even close. Anthropic proudly claimed its team of 16 Claude Opus 4.6 agents had written a Rust-based C compiler from scratch, without any access to the internet. Really? That's meant to impress me? Sure. As Anthropic claims, the AI-created C compiler can compile this, that, and the other thing. Yes, even Doom. But so what? The C language is 53 years old. That's older than many of you. The C ecosystem has torture test suites that encode the subtleties of the language. There are gold standard reference compilers, GCC and Clang, right, to compare against at every step. In addition, I have no doubt that all the many open source C compilers and tools were already in Claude's LLM. How could they not be? Well, yeah, I guess they were not in Claude's like actual weights, right? But were there traces of these open source C compilers inside Claude's weights? Probably, right? The same way Claude's weight have a trace of most of the internet. But were the open source C compilers fully inside Claude's weights? Probably not. Let's not confuse everything here. It's the same. We need to differentiate that, because it's the same confusion that a lot of people have sometimes. Like, there is this thing that I've been seeing a lot in the late few months, years. Is like a lot of people who don't care about LLMs, including programmers sometimes. They don't care about LLMs, they don't care about trying it, or maybe they tried it just once or twice and they don't like it or something. For some reason, they think that like the LLMs cannot create new work or something, which is clearly not the case, right? Like, even though it does have limits, but like OpenClaw, was not just an amalgamation of other libraries, that are just copy pasted. Like, that's not how it works, right? It's a bit deeper, it's a bit smarter. So no, many open source C compilers and tools were not already in full includes LLM. I'm wondering if this guy thinks that. If yes, I guess I'm not impressed by this article either, but let's not say that yet. Let's continue to read. How could they not be? Well, because they aren't. But, saying it didn't access the internet is like a student saying, I had copies of the code I was working on, but I turned my Wi-Fi off. Yeah, but my dear sir, an LLM doesn't have the full code base in its weights. It would be too big, to hold the entire internet verbatim inside an LLM's weight. Like, that's not how it works. Let's continue. Some people seem to think writing a C compiler is hard work. Well, yes, if you're writing it in assembly language, it is. But I hate to break it to you. Computer science undergraduates write C compilers every semester. Heck, you can learn to do it yourself thanks to Daniel McCarthy's developing a C compiler from scratch online class. And the class will cost you a lot less than the $20,000 it costs Anthropic. Anthropic's experiment starts after all of that hard work has been done, and it still fails. Sure, according to the headlines, it sounds great. 16 agents, 2 weeks, 100,000 lines of Rust, compiles Linux and Doom, drill into the details and community testing, and the story is far less impressive. Okay, now that's interesting. That's the kind of detail that I want here. For example, as several people pointed out on GitHub, because the Anthropic compiler doesn't include the path to the native C library on your system, it can't compile Hello World. As one person put it, apparently compiling Hello World exactly as the README says to is an unfair expectation of the software. There is a typo here. I'm not sure where. You can spell out the path, of course, but as another person added, you shouldn't have to LMAO or the shame of it all. That's a nice litmus test. If your miracle compiler chokes on a canonical first example without hand-holding, it's not ready to stand next to GCC and Clang in anyone's toolchain. But wait, there's more. Over in the programming subreddit, one top-rated comment spelled out in painful detail. It lacks the 16-bit x86 compiler needed to boot Linux from real mode. For this, it calls out to GCC. It does not have its own assembler and linker. The demo video was produced with the GCC assembler and linker. The compiler successfully builds many projects, but not all. It's not yet a drop-in replacement for a real compiler. The generated code isn't very efficient. Even with all optimizations enabled, it outputs less efficient code than GCC, with all optimizations disabled. Over on Hacker News, Commenters distilled the two narratives nicely. Pro LLM coding agents. Look, a working compiler beat in a few hours by an agent. This is amazing. Anti-LLM coding agents. It's not a working compiler though. It doesn't matter how few hours it took because it doesn't work. It's useless. The truth is in between, but it's much closer to an interesting lab demo than an obituary from human programmers. Yeah, for sure. My real worry remains that AI crazy companies will fire developers willy-nilly and replace them with AI to make their bottom line look better. No, they won't. I mean, people who have tried to do that have quickly realized that this is stupid. You would better have your already hired developers work more with AI to ship more, right? This is we are seeing unfold in the last few months, is that developers are still being hired and they're still being employed. It's just that now the managers and the executive managers are expecting more work to be done in the same amount of time now compared to before AI, which is actually like it does make sense because AI programming does increase the output that you can do and it does make things quicker compared to when you didn't have it, right? Especially in the last few months with like Opus 4.5, people who have work to do in programming and who have to build things quickly, like it's a tremendous demultiplier of programming ability. Is it the best quality code ever written? But it's certainly better than, most beginners code, I think. Is it the best? Does it have all the context it needs all the time, everywhere, 100% of the time? No. Does it make lots of mistakes still? Yes. But overall, I think, for developers who know what they do with it, it can increase productivity. AI simply isn't ready to take over programming jobs yet. Thank you, Captain Obvious. No matter how many CEOs insist it's already a game changer. Well, they insisted that last year, though. I guess this person is a bit lagged. No, it's just a useful tool that requires careful expert use to be effective. This is actually true. We know that. That's not how LLMs are trained. Like the current AIs of today did not discover programming and code from first principles. We know that. Like this is, if you're interested in AI and AI programming, this is pretty obvious, But for some reason, this person felt the need to remind us that, hey, by the way, they didn't discover compilers by themselves. Well, yeah, duh, we know. And the feat, in a way, like Anthropic is not trying to convince us that Claude rediscovered how to build a C compiler from scratch. Like, that's not what they're trying to say, That's not what the achievement is about. But this guy thinks that Anthropic is trying to convince people of that, even though it's clearly not. What's impressive with Anthropic's C compiler here, to me, is just that they managed to do that. They managed to make a working C compiler from scratch based on their training weights. For sure, it's not from scratch as a human from scratch. But yeah, they made it work, the C compiler, even though they didn't have access to it, like to the actual code base. They didn't have access to the internet, so they couldn't go online and check the actual real code bases and copy paste it, right? They just had to rely on their own training weights. And contrary to what this guy seems to think, the training weights obviously don't save the code bases 100%. Like the process of training an LLM on the internet and on, GitHub or whatever code bases is a very, very, very lossy process. Like an LLM cannot afford to remember verbatim, like 100% of the code bases, and especially specifically the C compilers open source code bases. Like it's not something that LLMs can do. It's a very lossy process to train those weights. And what's impressive here to me is that Anthropic actually managed to create models, so the Claude 4.6, that can try to remember with this lossy training process how to make a C compiler and fill the gaps of, all the gaps that is into anything that they try to write with their thinking process, with their, thinking tokens or whatever. The model try to reason around how to make this C compiler work because, of course, they don't have the open source C compiler code base into their weights, right? As is. They have vague traces of it. And based on these vague traces, they have to iterate on these, on these iterations that they generate with their thinking tokens, and they have to, try to reason about what they just produced, fix it, modify it, and at the end, like, I don't know how many times it took, like 2 weeks, something. At the end, they had a C compiler that was kind of working. And that's the achievement. That's the achievement. The achievement is not anything else. The achievement is the models could not do that before. They could not actually reason to fill the gaps, and now they can. But I think this, like, the way he's talking about this achievement, I think is very representative of like a lot of, programmers in denials who feel that they still have to look at it and they just can't contain their despise, and at the same time they don't actually understand how the tech actually works, and I think this is a bit sad to see. Yeah, the guy didn't really understand the achievement here. He tried to see something in this achievement that Anthropic never intended to say.